On February 7, 2023, a London courtroom delivered one of the harshest sentences in British legal history. A former Metropolitan Police officer, a man who carried a gun, wore a badge, and was trusted to protect the public, received 36 life sentences. But here is what almost nobody is talking about. What happened in November 2025 made his situation dramatically worse. And when you understand the full picture of what his daily existence looks like today, you will be left asking a question that has no easy answer. Is what David Carrick is living through actually worse than a death sentence? When David Carrick was sentenced in February 2023, the numbers alone were staggering. He pleaded guilty to 49 charges, including 24 counts of rape against 12 women, committed over a 17-year period while he was a serving police officer. The judge described his behavior as a prolonged, calculated campaign of abuse, carried out by someone who believed he was untouchable. You brazenly raped and sexually assaulted many women, some you barely knew. You behaved as if you were untouchable. She was not wrong. For nearly 2 decades, he was untouchable. He used his uniform, his authority, and the fear that came with his position to control and abuse vulnerable women. He reportedly told victims that no one would believe them if they reported a police officer. And for years, he was right. The minimum term handed down was 30 years and 239 days. That meant Carrick, then 48 years old, would not be eligible for parole until May 2052, when he would be 77. The judge was explicit. This sentence would bring him to, if not beyond, the natural end of his life. Most people saw those headlines and felt justice had been served. A dangerous predator locked away for the rest of his days. Case closed. But here's the thing. The story did not end there. Fast forward to November 2025, Carrick appeared in court again. This time, via video link from HMP Full Sutton. 2 more victims had come forward with accusations stretching back further than anyone knew. The court heard that his pattern of harmful behavior began when he was a teenager. A 12-year-old girl had been a victim. He was also convicted of raping another woman and subjecting her to a sustained pattern of coercive control during a toxic relationship years later. On November 20th, 2025, David Carrick received an additional life sentence, with a new minimum term of 30 years stacked on top of his existing sentence. His earliest possible parole date was pushed back to 2055. He will be 80 years old before he can even make an application. And the realistic probability, according to legal analysts who followed the case, is that he will never leave prison alive. But even that does not capture what his existence actually looks like right now. Let me explain. David Carrick is currently held at HMP Full Sutton in East Yorkshire. This is not a standard prison. It is a Category A and B maximum security facility, holding some of the most dangerous individuals in the United Kingdom. According to the Prison Reform Trust published data on high-security facilities, inmates in these institutions live under some of the most restrictive conditions in the British prison estate. Here is where Carrick's situation becomes particularly brutal. In prison culture, there is a hierarchy, and at the very bottom of that hierarchy, below gang members, below violent offenders, below almost everyone, sit those convicted of sexual offenses, particularly against women and children. Former police officers convicted of such crimes occupy a uniquely dangerous position. They are despised by inmates, and, according to prison reform researchers, require protective measures from the moment they arrive. His case made international headlines. His crimes were debated in Parliament. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner publicly called his actions unspeakably evil. Every person in that facility knows exactly who David Carrick is, and that knowledge follows him everywhere. So, how does the system keep someone like Carrick alive? The answer, according to experts in prison reform and former prison staff who have spoken publicly about Category A facilities, is isolation. Protective custody in British high-security prisons typically involves severe restrictions on movement. Inmates in these arrangements can spend the vast majority of their time confined to their cells, with very limited access to communal areas or programs. Outside time is often conducted separately from the general population. Think about what that means over a span of decades. The same 4 walls, the same ceiling, the same silence broken only by distant sounds from the rest of the prison. No meaningful social contact. No purpose. no routine beyond the rigid structure of the institution. And according to researchers at the University of Manchester who have studied long-term isolation in UK prisons, the psychological consequences of this kind of confinement are severe and cumulative. Cognitive decline, chronic anxiety, deep depression. Over time, the ability to engage normally with other people can deteriorate significantly. The United Nations has stated that prolonged solitary confinement, generally defined as more than 15 days, can constitute a form of cruel or degrading treatment. David Carrick has been living with extreme restrictions on his movement and social contact since early 2023. That is over 2 years. And he has at minimum 29 more years ahead of him. But even isolation is not absolute protection. And that is where it gets darker. There are moments when any prisoner must leave their cell. Medical appointments, legal proceedings, transfers between facilities. And each of those moments carries risk. Former prison staff and criminologists who speak publicly about the UK prison system have consistently noted that ex-police officers serving time for serious offenses face a persistent threat environment. The code among many long-term prisoners is unambiguous. Police officers are not extended the same tolerance as other inmates. For someone with Carrick's profile, that risk is amplified significantly. He is not just a former officer. He is arguably the most high-profile convicted predator in recent British history. No security system is perfect. That uncertainty, the knowledge that danger is always possible, is its own form of psychological punishment that compounds every single day. Now, here is something that makes this case uniquely disturbing and something that received far less attention than it deserved. During the investigation that followed his 2025 conviction, it emerged that a confession letter written by Carrick in 1990, when he was approximately 15 years old, had existed in his medical records for over 3 decades. In that letter, he reportedly acknowledged harmful behavior toward a child. The document sat untouched. No investigation followed. No action was taken. Consider what that means. If someone had read that letter, if the system had done what it was supposed to do, his career in the Metropolitan Police would never have happened. The women he went on to abuse over the following 17 years might have been spared. The victims who had to relive their experiences in courtrooms might never have become victims at all. That knowledge, that it was preventable, that the system failed, and that he continued anyway, is something Carrick will carry for the rest of his life. We cannot know what goes on in his mind, but we can say that the weight of those facts does not diminish with time. What makes this case particularly important beyond the individual is the institutional failure it exposed. The Metropolitan Police received 9 separate complaints about David Carrick between 2000 and 2021. 9 reported concerns over more than 2 decades. 9 moments when an investigation could have changed the outcome. Each time he remained on the force, he kept his weapon. He kept his access to people who trusted him. Following his conviction, the Metropolitan Police announced a review of past misconduct claims affecting approximately 1,000 officers. 6 of Carrick's victims had brought legal action against the police, alleging human rights violations. Those investigations and legal proceedings are ongoing. The institution that was supposed to catch someone like Carrick had him carrying a firearm and protecting government buildings for nearly 2 decades. And now we arrive at the question this case forces us to ask. In countries that still use capital punishment, death row inmates typically know their fate. There is eventually a final date, an end point. The wait is agonizing, but there is finality. The suffering stops. David Carrick has no end point he will likely reach as a free man. He has decades of the same isolation, the same threat environment, the same walls ahead of him. Even if he somehow survives to 2055, even if parole were granted at 80 years old, what awaits him? An elderly man with no support network, no financial foundation, and a name that is recognized everywhere in Britain for the worst possible reasons. Every moment of any hypothetical freedom would exist under the weight of what he did. Some argue that long-term imprisonment of this nature, particularly with the isolation required to keep someone like Carrick safe, is a far heavier punishment than execution. It is not a swift conclusion. It is a slow, daily reckoning that stretches across decades. Others argue the opposite, that he is alive, that he has access to basic health care, that there is at least biological existence, which is more than can be said for his victim's sense of safety and well-being. There is no clean answer here, and that ambiguity is part of what makes this case worth thinking about seriously. Before we close, let us be absolutely clear about one thing. The center of this story is not David Carrick's suffering. It is the suffering he deliberately caused to at least 13 people over more than 3 decades. Women who trusted him, a child who had no ability to protect herself. People whose lives were fundamentally altered by his choices. Choices he made repeatedly, calculatedly, and with full awareness of what he was doing. The 2 women whose courage in coming forward led to the November 2025 conviction sat through a trial and relived experiences no one should have to relive. Their bravery added another life sentence to his record. That matters. Trauma does not resolve when a conviction is handed down. For many of Carrick's victims, healing is a lifelong process. An sentence changes that. What a sentence does, and what these life terms achieve, is remove him permanently from any position where he could cause further harm. And in that specific practical sense, justice has been served. David Carrick is 50 years old. He has a minimum of 29 more years before he can even apply for parole. According to legal analysts and the judge's own assessment, he will almost certainly die inside HMP Full Sutton or a similar facility. The British justice system has, in this case, reached a verdict that is essentially permanent. A man who spent 17 years abusing the trust placed in him by both the state and the people he victimized will spend the rest of his natural life facing the consequences of that choice. Whether you view that as justice, as punishment, as a necessary protection of society, or whether you find yourself wondering, as some legal philosophers do, about the ethics of what decades of isolation actually constitute, this case does not offer simple conclusions. What it does offer is a stark reminder. Monsters are not always obvious. Sometimes they wear uniforms. Sometimes they pass every background check. Sometimes they operate for nearly 2 decades before anyone stops them. And sometimes the justice system, when it finally catches up, makes sure they never have the chance to do it again. So, here's the question I want to leave you with. Do you think David Carrick's sentence is justice? Or does a lifetime of isolation raise questions about what punishment is actually supposed to achieve? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video worthwhile, please like and subscribe. New videos every week covering cases that challenge how we think about crime, justice, and the systems that are supposed to protect us. Thanks for watching.